Hi there and welcome to lecture number 5 on this course on the Odyssey. Today we are going to be talking about Hades and the death of Odysseus' crew. So books 11 to 12 of Homer's Odyssey. Let's get started. So Hades is one of the 3 realms that make up the Greek cosmos and is itself split into various parts. The other 2 realms are Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. Now, Hades is believed to be located on the periphery of the earth, either beneath it or beyond Oceanus, the great river that encircles the world. We'll talk more about the exact structure of Hades shortly. So it is a shadowy realm, and the soul goes there after death. Burial is essential for crossing into Hades. This realm of darkness contrasts with the sunlit land of the living. There's a possible etymological link with Hades meaning unseen place, but this is debated. The Greek underworld is ruled by its patron god called Hades. He is the brother of Poseidon and Zeus, and his wife is Persephone, sometimes called Kore, whom Hades abducted while she was gathering flowers. So one of the best known Greek myths. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was so consumed with grief when she found out that her daughter had been abducted that she stopped growing harvests for the earth. Zeus therefore sent Hermes to free Persephone, but she had already eaten 6 pomegranate seeds and therefore must spend 6 months a year in Hades. This is what we call an aetiological myth. That means it is a myth that explains the origin of something. In this case, it is explaining why there are 6 better months in the year for growing crops, because that is when Persephone comes up to the earth and her mother, the harvest goddess, Demeter, is delighted, and hence all the crops grow. So, yes, burial is generally a prerequisite for entry into Hades. That is why the first shade, the first soul Odysseus encounters is Elpenor, and he asks Odysseus for proper burial. It's also why Sophocles' tragedy, Antigone, well, this is what the whole play turns on. Antigone wishes to bury her brother, but the king is not allowing it. Burying her brother is a big deal because if he doesn't get buried, he will never make it into the underworld. He won't make it across the river Styx. So there are Persephone and Hades. And as you can see, that is Persephone eating the pomegranate seeds that will keep her for 6 months a year in the underworld. So Greek beliefs about the underworld changed over time. In Homer, the dead are grouped together, whereas in Platonic philosophy, they first undergo judgment. Unlike in Christianity, the Greeks saw the afterlife as meaningless. The soul existed there but was inactive and functioned primarily as remembrance that the person had lived. Hence the Homeric viewpoint, and of later Greeks such as Theognis, that the best possible existence for humans is never to be born at all, and if you're unlucky enough to have been born, the next best is to die soon after birth. And this is because the pluses of life can simply never outweigh the high price of death. So in Book 4, the Odyssey, Menelaus recounts a prophecy that he shall live in the utopic Elysian fields. That's a realm in the underworld. I'll talk more about that in a moment. He will live there because he is husband to Helen, and thus, in the eyes of the gods, son-in-law to Zeus. So Menelaus has done nothing to deserve his propitious fate. However, as Greek polis, city-states, become more democratic, so does their view of the afterlife. And the Elysian fields ceased to be accessible only to heroes. Instead, the righteous can also be sent there following judgment from Minos and Rhadamanthus. So those were two kings of Crete. Overall, though, the Homeric depiction of Hades is dire, and this is very important for the Odyssey, as we'll come to later in this lecture. A descent into the underworld is known as a catabasis and is undertaken by Orpheus, Theseus, Heracles, Odysseus, Aeneas, and other mythological figures. So catabasis is a motif of ancient and modern literature. It's in The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, for instance. The best known catabasis is probably Orpheus, I would say. So Orpheus is the famous Thracian minstrel in Greek mythology. He sings as no one else can, and he is together with Eurydice, that is his beloved, but she dies from a snake bite, is taken down into Hades. Orpheus is so sad that he goes down there, managing to charm his way past Cerberus, the three-headed dog, and gets right down into the palace of Hades. The god convinces them to let him take Eurydice out, and he is permitted to do this providing he does not look back when ascending to the earth. He completes the whole descent without looking back, and it's only at the very end when he has gotten onto the earth that he looks back. Eurydice hasn't quite made it yet, and she falls back down into Hades forevermore. So not sure it's the origin of the term "don't look back," but it's very much the best example of it. Other famous catabases include Aeneas in the Aeneid. He is given the golden bough and descends into Hades primarily to learn about the future glory of Rome. Odysseus has to offer the blood of sheep for the souls to interact with him, and the anthropological explanation for this is that blood is the essence of life and thus needed to become conscious again. So here we go, structure of Hades. A quick caveat based on this map. You can search forever for a map of Hades and you'll never find one that is fully correct. This is partly because in different pieces of literature they describe the underworld differently. So the main difference with this is really that the river Styx, also known as the Stygian Marsh, should be closer to the underworld entrance, because generally they say the Styx is the one you have to cross to reach Hades. But there are some traditions where it's the Acheron River, as in this map here. So, talk about some key parts of the underworld. The river Styx is a goddess in her own right, and the gods swear oaths on the river Styx, and Charon ferries souls over the river and into the underworld. There is another way of making it into the underworld. Hermes Psychopompus, that means someone who guides souls. He takes people to the underworld as well, but most people go on Charon's boat over the river Styx. So the goddess Styx is the daughter of Oceanus and the Titan Tethys. It is the most important river of 5 rivers in Hades. Herodotus and Strabo located it in Arcadia, funnily enough. It's also known as the Stygian Marshes, as on the map here, and it is the river which Thetis dips Achilles into. So she has to hold him by his heel. That's why his heel doesn't get dipped in the water and is the only vulnerable part of his body, and hence the saying Achilles' heel. So, second river is the Acheron, and this is the river of woe. As mentioned, in some traditions, it is the one souls have to cross to reach Hades. We also have Phlegethon up in the top left, the river of blazing fire. It has a single mention in the Odyssey and then doesn't get mentioned again till Plato. It flows into Tartarus, as you can see on the map, and is associated with punishment, particularly with those who beat their parents. We then have the Cocytus, a little south of the Stygian Marsh. So Cocytus comes from the word corcuane, to wail, and so it's the river of wailing. And in the Odyssey, it's mentioned as a branch of the Styx, as you can see here as well. According to Plato, the Cocytus enters into Tartarus and it is associated with murderers. Lastly, we have the river Leth, as you can see on the right-hand side. It is the river of forgetfulness, named after the eponymous goddess of oblivion. All those who drink from the Leth experience complete forgetfulness, and shades can only be reincarnated after drinking from it. Next we have Erebus. This isn't labelled on the map, but it's the grey part at the bottom where they've put underworld entrance. So Erebus is a personification of darkness, not merely in the underworld though, but also darkness in general. And it is often used to refer to Hades itself. In many traditions, it is the area through which souls pass to reach Hades. We then have the asphodel fields. This is where the majority of the deceased dwell. It is not a desirable realm. Now, it's somewhat unclear how the ancients imagined these meadows. Were they filled with the flower asphodel, or were they fields of ash? Modern scholars are divided, partly based on the etymology of the word. So, what did souls do in the asphodel fields? Well, based on grave gifts, we can tell that the Greeks believed they played dice and board games. Marriage was also possible, and funnily enough, so was sexual intimacy. Though no children could be produced, there is some debate as to whether the Greeks believed sexual intimacy was possible in the afterlife. Elysium, often called the Elysian Fields, is the paradise which few attained. So in Elysium, souls could indulge in pastimes that they had enjoyed in life, such as music and athletics. Pindar and Hesiod named Kronos, Zeus's father, as its ruler, though Homer says it's Rhadamanthus, the wise king of Crete, who dwells there. In Odysseus 4, Homer describes Elysium. He writes that no snow falls there, no strong winds blow there, and there is never any rain. But day after day, the west wind's tuneful breeze comes in from the ocean to refresh its people. Finally, we have Tartarus, the realm of eternal punishments, up there in the top left. So, Tartarus is a deep abyss reserved for the worst offenders. It is also the prison for the Titans, who rebelled against the Olympian gods but were defeated. Hesiod wrote that a bronze anvil would fall for 9 days from heaven to earth, then for another 9 days from earth to Tartarus. Some of its famous residents: King Sisyphus, sent there for killing guests at his castle, for seducing his niece, and for considering himself craftier than the gods. In fact, he avoided death twice. And he believed he could simply report on the gods' indiscretions. His punishment was to push a boulder up a hill, and as soon as he gets to the top, no matter how close he is to the peak, it rolls back down again, and he has to repeat the whole process. The philosophical treatise by Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus, talks about, very briefly, to say Sisyphus is an example of how even he is happy because despite his completely pointless purpose, he finds his own calling in life. He can find some satisfaction. He can find a reason to exist in his stone. We also have King Tantalus in Tartarus. He was sent there for cutting up his son Pelops and serving him boiled to the gods when invited to dine with them. His punishment is to stand in a pool of water with a fruit tree hanging over him. Whenever he reaches up for the fruit, the branches move away, keeping the fruit out of reach. And whenever he bends down to take a drink, the waters recede before he can drink from them. Now you know where the word tantalizing comes from. And just to talk about one more resident of Tartarus, Ixion. He was king of the legendary Lapiths, a Thessalian tribe. So he grew to hate his father-in-law and ended up killing him, committing the first kin-related murder. So he's kind of the Greek Cain. However, he was actually punished for sexual misdemeanor because during a meal on Olympus, he started fondling Hera under the table. Zeus did not like this very much, and he later created a cloud imitation of Hera to see just how far Ixion would go. Ixion lay with the cloud, giving birth to Centaurus, from whom the centaurs come, and Ixion was then driven from Mount Olympus. Zeus struck him with a thunderbolt and later tied him to a winged flaming wheel that span perpetually, first in the sky and then down in Tartarus. And its spinning only comes to a stop briefly when Orpheus descends into the underworld and plays his heavenly music. So there is Sisyphus pushing his rock up the hill pointlessly, but if you follow Camus' logic, still finding some purpose in his futile endeavour. Good Titian painting, that one. And there is Tantalus trying to get the fruit from the tree, but he will never quite reach it. Couple more paintings. One by Peter Paul Rubens. So this is Ixion being fooled by the cloud Juno. Very muscular. And yeah, well, classic Renaissance, all naked and lots of breasts. And that is his punishment. I rather like that one. So tied to his wheel there, it will never stop spinning until Orpheus comes, providing brief respite. So, Odysseus' catabasis is arguably not a catabasis, but a nekia, and it is the earliest reference in literature to a journey into the underworld. So, a nekia is a necromantic rite by which ghosts are summoned and questioned about the future. Since Odysseus calls up the spirits using a magical libation and doesn't actually descend physically into Hades, some scholars prefer to call this underworld episode a nekia. However, most still refer to it as a catabasis, since on a thematic level, that's kind of what it is. So the first soul Odysseus encounters is Elpenor, as mentioned before. He wants a proper burial, and then comes Anticlea, his mother. So Elpenor says that by the malicious decree of some god, he got too drunk, fell off Circe's roof, and broke his neck. There's a criticism. Well, there was a criticism of ancient Christian saints about the Greek pantheon, saying that they used them as an excuse for their own failings. This would be an example of them doing that. Anticlea, Odysseus' mother, was alive when he sailed for Ilium, so he's very affected to see her. He also learns that his father, Laertes, is alive, but he is leading a miserable, isolated existence. Tiresias, the famous prophet of Greek mythology, he became a prophet. Well, he one day saw two snakes mating. This had the magical effect of turning him into a woman. And then Zeus and Hera were arguing over who has more fun during sex, women or men. So they asked Tiresias, because Tiresias did the only logical thing you do when you become a woman, and go and have sex with someone. Tiresias confirmed what Zeus was saying, that women have more fun during sex, and he then blinded him, but he gave him foresight to compensate for it. So Tiresias tells Odysseus that he must stop his crew from eating the cattle of the sun god, and that he's going to have some trouble at home in the form of the suitors. After killing them, he must set out once more until he finds a people who know nothing of the sea and never use salt with their food. This is part of what informs Dante's and Tennyson's reading of Odysseus as the eternal wanderer. Then Tiresias says to Odysseus, as for your own end, death will come to you far away from the sea, a gentle death. When he takes you, you will die peacefully of old age, surrounded by a prosperous people. And rather surprisingly, this prophecy is not fulfilled in any extant Greek literature. So in the Telegony, this epic poem about Telegonus, Odysseus son by Circe, Telegonus ends up killing Odysseus by mistake. And in Aeschylus' lost tragedy, Ghost Raisers, Tiresias prophesies that a heron's droppings containing a stingray barb will fall on Odysseus' bald head and rot his skin. So no peaceful death for Odysseus either way. And there is Tiresias and all the souls behind him rising up. We then have a catalogue of mythological figures. So these are shades whom Odysseus encounters. Catalogues of famous figures are typical of Homeric epics. The best known one is the Iliadic catalogue of ships. So in Book 11 here of the Odyssey, we encounter, among others, the founders of Thebes, Jocasta, that's the mother of Oedipus, Leda, who is the mother of Castor and Pollux, also known as the Dioscuri, and they were said to have been born from an egg along with Helen and Clytemnestra. We also encounter Ariadne, for instance, who helps Theseus defeat the Minotaur, and he thanks her by abandoning her on a beach. After a very sudden break in Odysseus' narrative, where he tells the Phaeacians it's time to go to bed, one of my favourite parts, Odysseus then talks to Agamemnon, who quite predictably complains about his wife, Clytemnestra, who conspired to kill him. And then Odysseus talks to Achilles. And this is where we get one of the most curious and nonsensical lines of the Odyssey. I would rather work the soil as a serf on hire to some landless, impoverished peasant than be king of all these lifeless dead. So the meaning is clear. The underworld is awful, and even Achilles, king of the dead, would not like to be there. He would do anything to be alive again. However, the sentence itself doesn't really make sense. Why would he be on hire as a serf to a landless peasant? If the peasant hasn't got any land, how can Odysseus be working that peasant's soil? And if the peasant is impoverished, then he doesn't have any money to employ Odysseus as a serf. It doesn't make any sense. It's a bit like that line in Star Wars, only Siths deal in absolutes, which is a great line, and you understand what it means, but it completely contradicts each other, because, of course, by adding only, you turn it into an absolute. But there you go. But this is a very, very important statement from Achilles, and this is where the ring composition comes into play, because Odysseus has already been through all his tribulations. He spent 7 years on Calypso's island, and now he's telling these stories to the Phaeacians. This means he was told by Achilles how awful the underworld is before Calypso offered to make him immortal and ageless. And therefore, Odysseus rejecting Calypso's offer emphasizes just how much he wants to get home and realize his kleos and return to his wife and son. Now, after Achilles, Homer resumes his mythological catalogue. Odysseus meets the great Ajax, one of the great Greek soldiers who fought in Troy. He meets Minos, the king of Crete, who is the father-in-law of the Minotaur. And he also meets Tantalus and Sisyphus, who we've talked about down there in Tartarus. And finally, he meets Heracles. And then we come on to book 12. One of the highlights of the Odyssey, starting with the Sirens. So there's a lovely Attic funerary statue of a siren. So the Sirens are another type of femme fatale. They are birds with women's heads whose sweet song seduces sailors into the sea, drowning them. It is contested, but some scholars believe the name siren comes from seira, which means cord, and eiro, to tie. That would mean that their name roughly means entangler, as in they entangle sirens with their song. Most ancient sources make the sirens daughters of the river god Achelous, typically by one of the muses, hence their beautiful song. And there are normally 2 to 3 sirens. Apollonius Rhodius, who wrote the Argonautica, and Ovid have them as companions of Persephone at her rape, and in their search for her, they are turned into girls with birds' faces. There's also a version which has them punished with metamorphosis into their form with the birds because of their failure to guard Persephone. And interestingly, there were cults to the sirens on Sicily and at various points in various parts of southern Italy, including Naples and Sorrento. Few men in Greek literature survive their temptations. Odysseus and the Argonauts are the main ones. So the Sirens tempt Odysseus with their mellifluous song by offering him knowledge. However, he has been forewarned by Circe, so he ties himself to the mast because he wants to hear their song, and has previously stopped his crew's ears with beeswax. In the Argonautica, it is Orpheus who saves the Argonauts, since his beautiful song overpowers the Sirens. But these are the exceptions. In fact, so many sailors have been charmed by the Sirens' song into landing on their island that their meadow is strewn with mouldering corpses. Scylla and Charybdis constitute the second mini-adventure of Book 12. And yes, while Charybdis hens Odysseus' ships on the one side, Scylla snatches men from the other. This is where we get the idiom between Scylla and Charybdis. So, Charybdis is a sea monster who inhabits a small rock, though sometimes she is simply described as a vortex, depends on which source text you read. She sucks down the salt water 3 times a day, creating a whirlpool that sinks ships. And scholars tend to locate Charybdis in the Strait of Messina, so between Sicily and the mainland. Funnily enough, there is a whirlpool there, but it is only dangerous to small vessels. As talked about briefly in the previous lecture, Scylla was once a beautiful woman, but she was turned into a Hydra-like monster by Circe because Circe was jealous of the fact that Scylla enjoyed the love of Glaucus, whom Circe herself loved. Scylla is the 3rd consecutive femme fatale in this book and truly fearsome. In fact, her cavern runs down to Erebus itself. And here's the description of it. It is the home of Scylla, the creature with the dreadful bark. It is true that her yelp is no louder than a newborn pup's, but she is a repulsive monster nevertheless. Nobody could look at her with delight, not even a god if he passed that way. She has 12 feet, all dangling in the air, and 6 long scrawny necks, each ending in a grisly head with triple rows of fangs, set thick and close, and darkly menacing death. Up to her waist she is sunk in the depths of the cave, but her head protrudes from the fearful abyss, and thus she fishes from her own abode, groping greedily around the rock for any dolphins or seals or any of the larger monsters which Amphitrite breeds in the roaring seas. No crew can boast that they ever sailed their ship past Scylla unscathed, for from every blue-prowed vessel she snatches and carries off a man with each of her heads. So this is what Circe says to Odysseus, and she reiterates how fearsome Scylla is. I tell you, Scylla was not born for death. She is an undying fiend. She is a thing of terror, intractable, ferocious, and impossible to fight. No, against her there is no defence, and the best course of action is flight. For if you waste time by the rock in putting on your armour, I am afraid she may dart out once more, make a grab with all her 6 heads, and snatch another 6 of your crew. So drive your ship past with all your might, and call on Crataeis, Scylla's mother, who whelped her into the world to be the bane of mankind. She will prevent her from pouncing out again. Like this idea, you have to call on her mother to make her behave. If you're thinking Circe's description, characterization of Scylla is somewhat hypocritical, since she is the one who turned Scylla into the monster. That is true. However, what we do not know is whether the myth of Scylla, Glaucus, and Circe existed before Homer penned the Odyssey. It might have been a myth invented later. We do not know that. So Odysseus escapes Scylla and Charybdis, losing his 6 ablest men. But as Circe says here, it could easily have been 12. In fact, 6 is the best that Odysseus could hope for. It's also worth reflecting here on the fact that Circe gave Odysseus a choice after escaping from the Sirens. He could either go by Scylla and Charybdis or past the Wandering Rocks, which are sheer cliffs with tempestuous seas that wreck ships. And it's notable that Odysseus picks the route with the monsters. Why is that? Well, Circe does very much present the Wandering Rocks as certain death for everyone. That's probably the main reason. But perhaps this itself shows just how terrified sailors were of shipwreck. Of course, it could also just be for narrative purposes, since the Odyssey would not be quite as exciting if they went past the Wandering Rocks rather than these 2 monsters. So there is Glaucus and Scylla. Glaucus is a sea god, and that is Scylla spurning his advances. Circe cannot bag Glaucus for herself, and therefore she poisons the pool which Scylla bathes in, turning her into the monster, as we have here. So, yes, depicted as originally dog's heads at her waist, though Scylla is a popular topic of modern art, including fan art as well. In fact, got this one right here, which I quite enjoy. So that's Scylla gnashing on one of Odysseus' crew, of course, and those monster heads very much inspire fear, and there is the ship between Scylla and Charybdis. So, last of all, we'll talk about Thrinace, the Isle of the Sun God, and the downfall of Odysseus' crew. Odysseus has been warned by both Tiresias and Circe not to let his crew touch the livestock of Hyperion, better known as Helios. He's the sun god. So there is repetition throughout the epic, including at the very beginning in the invocation, to say that Odysseus' crew brought down their own demise by devouring the cattle of Hyperion. So the sun god has 7 herds of oxen and 7 flocks of sheep, each numbering 50 a head. They are guarded by his daughters, the divine nymphs Phaetusa and Lampetie, and everyone knows that harming them will incur Helios' wrath. That means there are 350 cows and 350 sheep, corresponding to the number of days in the ancient Greek calendar, and the 7 herds are generally associated with the 7 days of the week by scholars. Helios cows do not die or breed. It's also worth a quick mention here on the importance in Greek mythology of certain animals to the gods. For instance, there is the well-known story of Minos, Pasiphae, and Poseidon. So Poseidon sends down a white bull on Crete, and Minos is supposed to sacrifice it, but he finds the bull so beautiful that he doesn't do this, and to punish him, Poseidon has his wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the Cretan bull, She then gets Daedalus, the master craftsman, the father of Icarus, to create a wooden contraption to make her look like a cow so that she can mate with the bull, and she later gives birth to the Minotaur. So yes, essentially the Greek gods often have animals that are important to them. Now, why do Odysseus' men eat Helios' cattle despite having been warned? This, for me, is one of the most interesting parts of books 9 to 12, because Eurylochus, one of Odysseus' crewmates, says, "My comrades in suffering, listen to what I have to say. To us wretched men, all forms of death are abominable, but death by starvation is the most miserable way to meet one's doom. So come, let us round up the best of the sun's cows and sacrifice them in honour of the immortals who live in the broad sky. If ever we reach our homeland in Ithaca, our first act will be to build Hyperion, the sun god, a magnificent temple and fill it with precious offerings. But if in anger at the loss of his straight-horned herds, he chooses to wreck our ship with the support of the other gods, I would sooner drown instantly in a watery grave than waste away by slow degrees on a desert island." So this is interesting. It is an impious act because these are the sun god's cattle. However, Odysseus' crew are pious in their impiety, because they say the first thing they'll do is sacrifice the cattle, the best ones, in honour of the immortals, and then when they get home, their first act will be to build a magnificent temple full of precious offerings in honour of Hyperion. And as mentioned, it is repeated throughout the text and throughout the epic, and particularly by Odysseus, that it was their men's folly which caused their downfall. But when you read this is completely logical. You know, Eurylochus says, well, better to die on a full stomach and by drowning than to waste away by starvation. So they died, but not because of folly. And this actually contributes to an interesting subtext in books 9 to 12, which we'll look more closely at in the seminars about Odysseus being a poor leader. Moving on, Helios is obviously furious. He asks Zeus for vengeance, and the cloud gatherer therefore promises to smite Odysseus' ships. Odysseus finds out about this later from Calypso, who heard it from Hermes. And we actually have a thematic problem here, because Polyphemus, the Cyclops, has cursed Odysseus by invoking his father Poseidon. And yet, Odysseus and his crew are undone by the sun god. It doesn't really match up. This might be the result of the process of oral composition, drawing from the versions of different bards and merging myths. And so in the end, we get what is essentially a lack of cohesion, a lack of thematic cohesion. We'll see this in other parts of the Odyssey as well, but it's noticeable that things just don't quite add up here. So Odysseus' men feast for 6 days on the holy cows, and then sinister omens make it clear that they have angered the gods. The hides began to crawl about. The meat, roast and raw, bellowed on the spits, and a sound as of lowing cattle could be heard. That's only going to result in disaster. Zeus summons a squall on the 7th day when they finally set sail. This wrecks their ship, killing all Odysseus' men to the man. Odysseus, however, survives by lashing the broken mast and keel together to create a raft. He is taken back past Scylla and Charybdis, but hides in a fig tree. When Charybdis spits up the mast and the keel again, he splashes into the water, holds on, and drifts for 9 days before he washes up on Ogygia, where Calypso saves him. The details of this survival story are important, as we shall talk about a bit more in the next lecture and also in the seminars. And just to end, I've always liked this painting. So by Palazzo Poggi. I think you say the G hard in Italian, I'm not sure. But yeah, this is Odysseus' companion stealing Helios' cattle. I've always liked the man in the bottom left with the penetrating eyes. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. In the next lecture, we are going to be talking about the so-called Cretan tales. That is Odysseus' stories when he has landed on Ithaca again. And about whether Odysseus is really a hero or a shrewd, mendacious villain. Hope to see you then. Thank you.